is going to be fresh.
Hi, I'm Josh Rains, and this is the Fresh Stories podcast with my friend Mark Robison, and we're talking about leadership and innovation. This podcast would not be possible without our friends at Windows, Doors, and More. Thank you so much for your partnership. So, Mark, we are discussing today leadership and innovation. You preached this message at church
I did.
months or years ago,
Yeah.
and it still stays with me. Can you give us like a brief summary of what you spoke about?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about in that message was the fact that leadership really comes out of calling. And a lot of people get leadership messed up. They think of management as leadership, and it's really not. Leadership is something a little bit higher level. Leadership has to be based, though, out of calling. Otherwise, it begins to change over everything of what we do, and it begins to get in the way of fully fulfilling our mission. And so what I mean by that is leadership out of calling is that knowing what I'm called to do and only what I'm called to do, and then allowing the Lord to give us His mind so that we can see where He's taken us and we begin to walk that path. So that's really the essence of that.
And that can be confusing in a world where you're getting so much input from other places, right? A lot of people struggle of finding their calling. Like, what is the step to even get to know what is your purpose? What is your calling? How do you know what you're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, and it's a simplistic answer for a very difficult question, right? Because the simplistic answer is you simply ask God. He says that He loves wisdom, and if we ask Him for wisdom, He gives it to us generously. And that's part of it. And then in Corinthians, it says that we have the mind of Christ. That we have the mind of Christ. I think that's what gets people confused so often is that we need to know. We need to have our mind to understand what it is we're supposed to be doing. And the reality is, His ways are above our ways. His thoughts are greater than our thoughts. We have to get to the place that we're accepting His mind into us, right? Romans 12 says that we have the renewing of our mind. Well, that renewing is by understanding God's purposes, God's plans, God's initiatives for us, and so knowing where that comes. So the simple answer is God will tell you your calling if you simply seek it and let Him find it out. But remember, it says that it's the glory of God to conceal things. It's the glory of kings to seek them out. Meaning that the basic person doesn't take the time and energy to do it. But the king can invest tons of time and money to find the answer.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. So it's priorities, right? Like, is a priority thing, are you actually searching for,
Exactly.
or are you waiting for it to come to you?
Exactly. And I think that's the difference, right? Phil Mickelson, the great golfer, said, an amateur practices until he gets it right. A professional practices until he can't get it wrong. That's the difference, right? It's the energy we put into it. All of us can spend 15 minutes in prayer, but are we willing to spend 3 hours in prayer to seek the Lord and find the answer on calling? And so it's those kinds of things. But that's where leadership begins to rise up, is we're going to go the extra mile. We're going to go the extra 2 miles. We're going to go the extra 3 miles because we want to know, and we have people that are relying on us to know. And so we have to step into that place.
Yeah, and as you talk about innovation, I love this conversation. I know you and your organization, you guys are doing it extremely well, and you're promoting innovation, because I think for the longest time in the Christian world, that hasn't existed as much. The push for innovating new ways for people to encounter the Lord, or for us to do better outreach. Why is innovation lacking in the faith community? Why do you believe that is?
Yeah, I think it's because we follow. I really think that's it. We sit in the pews and we follow. We're not out there leading. We leave that to our priests and our pastors and our elders and deacons, and we step back and we're okay with that. And I think that's what hinders innovation. Innovation takes leaders to do it, but it also takes the followers that want to do it.
Yeah.
And faith interrupts our life, whether we like to admit it or not. I mean, if we're gonna do the works of Jesus, right, the good deeds, so that people see them and praise our Father in heaven, we have to get out of our chair and go do them. And that it disrupts life because usually it's not at the time that we want to do it, right?
Right.
I'm trying to rush through the grocery store, not stop and pray for the cashier who you can literally see on her faces crying over an issue and needs that. And God has orchestrated that time. But I've got to get to the ball game, or I've got to, it interrupts life. And I think that hinders the faith community. It hinders every community, but it's certainly inside the faith world as well.
Yeah, I think one of the stories that you told in your sermon that really stood out to me was the story of Caleb. And this part spoke to me more than any, it was a great sermon, but this part really stood out to me. And you were talking about how Caleb's role was just to see if there was giants in the land. He wasn't called to lead. How often do we take what God's called us this one thing to do, and then we say we need to own this project or lead this project, and God's like, no. I just called you for this one role. We assume that we need to lead whatever comes out of that, but sometimes that's not God's plan.
Yeah, I think I said in that my belief is that the main reason that not-for-profits fail in the country is because my idea, I lead. And it's a pride thing.
Yeah.
But it's also, if you look at small businesses, I think it's the primary reason small businesses fail is because my idea, I lead. But your skill sets aren't necessarily about leading an organization. It's about getting a product built or making it better or enhancing the service or bringing the wisdom along with that.
Yeah.
But business skills and product skills and operational skills, they're all different. And yet, for some reason, certainly here in America, we feel like if it's my idea, then I get it. So that story, if you remember, it's when the spies went out into the land, right?
Yeah.
And they came back, and 10 of them said, oh, it is definitely the promised land, and actually recited, right out of their words, recited exactly what God told them that the promised land would look like. So there was no doubt to the entire Israel community, which was, I think I told you, was the size of Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? So the entire city of Chicago marching across to Indianapolis.
Yeah.
That's what you had going on. And so this entire community knew this was the promised land. And these 10 spies says, but these people that he also told us would be there are giants and they're going to hinder us. And Caleb stood up and said, oh, wait a minute. What are we saying? Yes, it's the promised land and God told us to go in. Let's go get it.
Yeah.
But then what did he do? He handed the information to Moses. And Moses then led the next step. Right? It wasn't Caleb. Caleb didn't become in charge. Caleb gave his report. And he gave it to the people. And he gave it passionately.
Yeah.
But he did not make the decision to go forward or not to go forward. Moses made that decision. And then God didn't even let Moses go into the promised land. Who went? Right? They had to raise up somebody else. And it wasn't Caleb. It was Joshua.
See, people being upset by that, like, wait, I delivered the message. It was my news.
Right.
Why is it not? I should be the next in line.
Yeah.
And I want to know more, like, in that story, like, was Caleb upset? Was he angry?
No. We know that he said, I'm taking the next hill. He was okay. He knew his calling. This is my place. I'm this. And this is what God wants me to do. I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to do it to the best of my ability under the authority of Moses.
Wow.
He never left that place. And then under the authority of Joshua. And Joshua gave him a lot of freedom to get out there and do the work.
Yeah.
But Joshua is still in charge.
Wow. So there's this submission to authority.
Of course.
That happens. Even if you disagree with the authority, there's still that submission that takes place.
And you have to be careful on why do you disagree, right? Because it may be time for you to go somewhere else if that's the case too.
True.
So I equate that to the story of Jonah, right? Jonah's on a boat going the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? And the ship captain now is driving that boat, and he has a choice to make. He's either going to allow the boat to sink and lose the entire crew, or throw Jonah over. And I think that's the same case in corporations and churches. There are times that we just need to let the individual who's not walking in their calling leave. And let God move them to their calling. Right? But it's not a fun thing. And it certainly doesn't feel like love at the time. When that captain, I mean, think about it. Jonah made the captain throw him over the boat. Jonah did not jump into the water on his own.
Wow.
right? So the captain had to choose and throw, and that doesn't look like love. But it was love for every single one of those crew members.
Wow. Wow.
And we have to put ourselves in a place of saying, what is God calling me to do? And that over anything else is where I need to be. And if that's leading, lead. If that's visioning, vision. If that's teaching, teach. If that's custodian, custodian. If that's being a mother full-time, be a mother full-time. Be a father full-time. What is that place that God's called you to? And I think it's pulling us back to this reality of who we are in Christ for Christ. Not who we are in the United States, in Fort Wayne. I mean, that's where the ego and the arrogance begins to come up. And that's when the enemy has the ability to begin to thwart God's plans. And we know we're not supportive of that.
There were so many things you said in that. That was so good. The number one thing I heard was he knew it wasn't about him, it was about his people on the ship in the Jonah analogy, right? And I think sometimes we forget because we're building up these amazing Christian organizations, having so much impact, but it's kind of, we don't understand, we don't align correctly, right? It could be building our own kingdom.
That's right.
And when you build your own kingdom and someone leaves that, you take it as a personal insult instead of, oh, they're just moving to another part of the overall kingdom, right? And you hear that, you see that all the time. And then there's also this identification about being comfortable knowing that I just don't have that skill set. And I think sometimes, you know, you have these kids that play basketball growing up, right? You have a child, he's playing basketball, soccer, and football, and he's not so great at sports. And the parents like, oh, you're fantastic, you're amazing at it. And you feed this false hope.
Right.
And so when they're not, their spirits get crushed because like what they were told was supposed to be great. So how do you balance that? How do you balance that encouragement versus the realness of, man, you're just not that good at this?
Yeah, it's never easy because I want to default to love, right? That's my desire. Whether I get there or not, you can ask our employee base. But that's where I want to default is to love. I want to be supportive and encouraging, and my team will tell you I'm very sensitive. I'm a very sensitive guy. So it hurts when somebody's leaving or when we have to let somebody leave, right? And it's not something we want to get to. But I have found in my leadership that I've never been asked to lead alone. And that's where the problem comes up, is when we start making it out of our own head, our own decision, our own thing. First of all, God leads me. And if I've got a conflict with an individual or their inability to do something, it doesn't mean I have to share the truth in love in a way that on everything, right? There are some times that it's God's role to do that.
Yeah.
And by me praying, I have this standard in my own being that I won't do that decision, that negative decision, unless I've taken at least 60 days and usually 90 to pray over the situation.
Yeah.
And you know what, Josh? I can only count on one hand the number of times God hasn't fixed it without me having to step in. That individual's left on their own. They've gotten coaching from their manager, stepped up and did something, or whatever it is. But I've only had to fire a couple people because God always intervenes. I'm not alone. And those difficult decisions of saying, I have to go up and tell them, really, maybe God can do that, especially if you're working with someone that is one of his children, because they have ears to listen to their father too. And so asking the Lord to step in. Now, I'm not setting all that responsibility on God either, because he's called me to be in this leadership place. But then I have a team around me. And so one of the things you can ask my team is, I am horrible. I mean, literally horrible, probably the worst person in the United States on recognizing talent and hiring it. Because I believe everybody's excellent. So you say you have a passion for Jesus, a passion for the local church, I'm ready to hire you, right? I don't even check your skill set. So I have to have around me individuals that they can come to me and say, Mark, that's a red flag. What's a red flag? Well, the fact that they're wanted by the police because of a robbery from last night. That's a flag that we probably shouldn't hire them. Really? Because I think they love Jesus. And so having those people that can step in and give me the guidance and give me support in making those decisions.
Yeah.
So that we make decisions together. So I don't lead alone. And if you're leading alone and you feel like these decisions are piled on top of you and you're the only one that can do it, you're probably not standing in your calling. You've probably stepped outside of it.
Wow.
So, no, I'm not saying all the time because I only see it from my perspective.
Yeah.
But God never asked me to lead alone. And I'm still not leading alone.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to get there. I want to dig deep on that, right? Because there are a lot of leaders that are doing all these different things and they don't have that team around them,
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so when you're doing all those
Especially
things,
smaller organizations.
especially smaller organizations, right? However, they hire people though to take these jobs, but they're still doing it. Where does that come from? Is it a lack of trust? Like where does that come from?
I think it could be a couple things, but I think it's a lack of belief. So I don't think people believe that anybody wants to help them. Right? I'm not good enough for that. I'm just little old me. And I think there's a bit of that. I think that drives it as much as anything. For instance, I was talking with a youth leader here in town.
Yeah.
And she asked me, we were having dinner, and she asked me, she goes, well, how do I really get better at my craft? And I said, how many people do you have around you that are really good in your craft? Well, nobody. I said, then how are you going to get better? You can't have a board of elders around you that you don't have to pay because they believe in your mission. I'm not saying get the amen people, the ones that come in and tell you, good job, even though you suck.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's going in and finding those individuals that really know what they're doing and have been doing it for years. Isn't that what we hear when we get married? Make sure you find folks that have been married longer than you and let them mentor into you. That's what it's all about. If you've got mentorees and coaches that are sitting there, why don't you have them?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, let's back up. What's the excuse for not having a coach? Because you can't afford them, or because you can't find them, or because nobody loves you? I mean, honestly, inside the church, there are a lot of us that love what you're doing and would love to be supporting you. And so I think a big part of it is we don't believe people want to help us, or we're afraid they're going to see how lousy we really are at it. So now I'll go into the CEO role, where the numbers haven't changed for decades. 75% feel like they're not qualified for the work they're doing.
Wow.
75% of CEOs. That's why the lifespan's only 3.5 years. Because they get into it and they think, oh, I can't do this, and I'm going to be found out, and they bumble. Well, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Right? We have mentors, we have coaches, we have plenty of folks and opportunities around us to help us be better at our craft.
What I love about you, because I know you personally, I used to work for your organization, right?
Yeah.
And what I love in our personal relationship, you've been very transparent, open, and honest with me. You are very transparent with your core team that you work with, your executive team. And I think sometimes we're not transparent enough to let people know next. So it's like, hey, I have a flaw in this. How did you get to that point?
Yeah. It really came out of my previous job. When I first joined the workforce, I graduated from Manchester as a CPA and went in and worked for Ernst & Winnie, then Ernst & Young. So one of the big was Big 8, then Big 6, and Big 4. So it worked our way down. But I worked for them, and I had managers all the time. And so I began to watch how those folks were treated. And I remember being on this one engagement, and the leader, the manager said, I need you to do this. And I'd been doing it long enough to know that it didn't quite make sense. And so I asked some questions.
Yeah.
And he gave me partial answers and then said, just go do it. Just go do it. Just go do it. And I finally said, I'll go do it. But if you tell me what you're really trying to accomplish, I'll do it twice as well. But otherwise, I'm just going to do this. And then you're going to have to sift through it and figure out, did I get you what you really wanted? Because this is all you've asked me to do.
Yeah.
And I realized that his philosophy was, I'll tell you if you need to know it, otherwise it's confidential. And I found it was such a waste of time and energy on my part as well as his
Yeah.
to walk in that pathway. And so I really believe that if I tell everybody everything, I'm going to get a better answer the first time back. And we're all more efficient and effective in what we do.
Yeah.
And so that's what really drove me to it. By the way, that manager, I hired him later to work for me because I still loved him.
Yeah.
And he was still incredible. And he changed and became more transparent over that time too. But that reality is that if we're transparent, what have we got to lose? Other than our own pride,
Yeah.
which is a good thing to get rid of.
Correct.
What are you really going to lose when you lay the cards on the table? Now, I'm not saying that we can share everything, because there are some things that are confidential, and laws restrict us from saying certain things and doing certain things. But when you're working with your team,
Yeah.
and we're all in the same goal, let's do it together,
Yeah.
and then let's go forward.
That's incredible, because it's like what Jesus told his disciples. He sent them out 2 by 2,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's something about that community aspect, even in leadership,
Exactly.
right? And I love what you said earlier about, like, there really isn't much of a reason not to have people speaking into your life. Because, Mark, I've seen you travel a lot. You're doing a lot. If you have nobody pouring in, you're going to be exhausted.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
going to be drained and just super tired and not giving your full 100% best. So what do you tell the leader that's struggling with that right now? They're exhausted. They're not giving their best. They just feel like they have to do everything for themselves. What can you tell them to encourage them?
Yeah, usually you can actually draw it back and realize that they're not spending time with the Father. So whether that's a popular answer or not, you said I'm transparent, so I'm
Yeah,
going to be
yeah.
pretty clear. It's almost always tied back to I'm not spending time with the Lord. And I've got to get back into that time with the Lord. And so I can point at other people, but I'm telling you how when I start to get burned out,
Yeah.
because it happens. I'm pushing myself so far. I'm realizing that what I'm doing is beyond my calling. That's what I find out when I get back to the Lord. Is saying, Lord, I'm running on empty here. Now, if I'm running on empty, it's not because of me. It's because of my lack of relationship with the Father. So Jesus worked a lot harder than I did
Yeah.
in his 3 years of ministry on the earth, right? He worked much longer hours, and he always found time to sneak away, to be refueled by the Lord. And we can read with Elijah. Remember, after he destroyed the prophets of Baal, and then Jezebel and Ahab said, well, we're going to kill him. And he ran off and hid, right?
Yeah.
And he's hiding underneath the tree, and God provided for him. And it said that he gave him food, and that food sustained him for 40 days. So God is more than capable of providing whatever we need to do and fulfill whatever he calls us to. But if we're going beyond that, that's where that burnout can really step in. And so it's going back to the Father to be refreshed, and confirming, okay, is this still the path that you want me on? Have I strayed from it? Where is it that you want me to set? Bringing your team together, right? Because those are the advisors that you've asked for. A council of advisors gives us that strength. And holding yourself accountable into that team and into the Lord. But it's that the prayer life is the biggest part for me, of finding burnout. I can't help you with everybody else because I just don't know their situations. But prayer life holds me inside the presence of the Lord, and that's where my energy has to come from. So it really comes down to that. And we get tired. And so what do? We do like the apostles, like Peter, James, and John in the Garden of Gethsemane. What did they do? They fell asleep. And what did Jesus say? Stay awake and pray for an hour so that you will not fall into these temptations.
Yeah.
And they fell asleep. All Jesus wanted was an hour. And so are we willing to step back and say, I've got to give him a full hour here? And I'm not saying that's prescriptive. I'm saying that's the concept. And so I have to back up, and I have to find that prayer time with Jesus. I have to spend that time with the Father, and I have to hear what they have to say. And I have to rest in them and let them reset me, and restore me.
Thank you, Mark, so much just for your time, your take on leadership. What I love is, like, you're able to change out different lenses, right? And I think that's one of the top things that I see in your leadership. You can change out a lens. Like, I see it, God sees it this way, I see it this way, and you can see it from another person's angle. Like, what is it like to be on the other side of of this. And so thank you, Mark, for your time. I appreciate you. I love you, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Good to be here.
It's gonna be fresh.